The mist clung to the village of Verloc like a ghostly veil, its winding stone paths slick with dew, whispering under the weight of ancient secrets. Each narrow passage twisted beneath towering, gnarled trees whose branches seemed to claw at the sky. In the faint morning light, shadows danced at the edges of the mist, a spectral ballet that the villagers had long learned to ignore. Verloc was a place where tales were born in the gloom of the forests and whispered around flickering hearth fires. Stories of strange whispers and ghostly shapes that roamed the mist-laden woods. The villagers walked with hurried steps, their heads bowed, always keeping their distance from the darkened edges of the forest, where it was said that the shadows watched and listened. Alara stood at the edge of the village square, her arms crossed, her sharp eyes studying the mist that seemed to swirl with hidden faces. Her dark hair, tied in a loose braid, danced gently in the breeze. Unlike the others, she felt no shiver of fear beneath the mist's touch. To her, these tales were nothing more than old superstitions, whispered to keep children from wandering into the woods or to explain the unexplained. Old stories for old minds, she would often mutter, her voice tinged with defiance. Her sharp mind craved reason, truth, something solid beyond the whisper of fearful tales. Yet, in her heart was a gnawing void, a desire to understand, to prove that these shadows were nothing but tricks of the mist. Her grandmother, Odette, was the keeper of those tales. In the flickering light of the hearth, her voice would weave stories of spirits, curses, and forgotten wisdom, each tale wrapped in the weight of warning. "Not all stories are meant for curious ears, child," Odette would whisper, her wrinkled hands gesturing to the embers that danced in the hearth. Alara would often laugh, dismissing the words as the ramblings of an old woman. Her pride, too, fierce to bend to fear. "A tale is only as real as those who believe it," she would say, turning away from the glowing hearth to the darkness beyond the window. But not everyone in Verloc shared her bold disbelief. Marcus, her childhood friend, stood as a quiet believer, his gentle nature a stark contrast to her defiant spirit. "The forest whispers for a reason, Alara," he would often warn, his voice steady, his kind eyes filled with worry. But Alara's laughter would cut through his caution like a blade. "Fear is a prison, Marcus, and I won't live in one." One misty evening, as the villagers gathered around Odette's hearth, her voice wove a tale that even Alara found herself listening to, her heart unknowingly gripped by a strange chill. It was the tale of the forbidden story, a tale whispered only to the bravest, shared in secret during the winter solstice. Those who dared to listen alone were cursed, followed by shadows and whispers they could never escape. The villagers leaned closer, their faces pale in the warm light, but Alara's eyes burned with curiosity. A tale meant to keep children in bed, she whispered to herself, but a strange thrill danced along her spine. Days passed, but the tale lingered in her mind, a faint, restless whisper that refused to fade. Driven by her defiant hunger for truth, Alara found herself searching her grandmother's old attic one quiet night. As the cold moonlight filtered through the dusty window, her hands brushed against ancient trinkets, forgotten memories, and books with faded covers. Her breath quickened when her fingers brushed a thick ancient book buried beneath a worn cloth. Its cover was etched with strange symbols, faded yet ominous. A chill danced along her spine, but her curiosity burned away. The unease. This had to be it. The forbidden story. Alara's heart raced as she pulled the book free, her hands trembling with a strange electric thrill. It was just a book, old and crumbling, but something in its weight, in the faint scent of dust and decay, seemed to whisper of forgotten fears. "Just a story," she whispered, brushing away the cobwebs that clung to its edges. She slipped back to her room, closing the door behind her, the book heavy in her arms. The village outside was quiet, the mist thickening against the window, and a distant wind howled like a mournful wail. Midnight approached, the silence deep and cold. A single candle burned on her desk, its flame wavering as though caught in a silent breath. Alara placed the book before her, its cover glinting faintly in the flickering light. She leaned close, her finger tracing the faded symbols, her breath coming faster. "It's just a story," she whispered again, her voice unsteady. The wind outside seemed to sigh, pressing against the window pane, but Alara's pride burned brighter than her fear. With a final, defiant breath, she opened the book. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, yet each word seemed to shimmer beneath her gaze. She began to read, her voice a quiet murmur, the words strange and heavy, their meaning just beyond her grasp. The room seemed to darken, the candle's light dimming, and the air grew cold, biting against her skin. But she read on, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, as the shadows around her seemed to thicken, pressing closer. A faint whisper brushed against her ear, a soft, sorrowful sigh. She froze, her eyes darting to the empty room. Nothing, just the mist curling against the window. But then she heard it again, a faint, desperate whisper, growing louder with each word she read. "It's just the wind. Just the wind," she whispered, but her voice trembled now. The pages seemed to pulse beneath her touch, the ink darkening, twisting. The whispers grew louder, a soft, desperate wail that seemed to echo from the shadows. Her breath came in gasps, her hands shaking, but her pride forced her to read faster. The whisper became a voice, clear and pained. "Why didn't you stop?" it cried. Her voice broke, a scream tearing from her lips as the shadows seemed to rise from the page, a twisted, flickering figure with hollow, sorrowful eyes. The room was a storm of darkness. The candle snuffed out in an instant. Alara stumbled back, the book crashing to the floor, its pages fluttering wildly. "Alara!" Marcus's voice burst through the darkness, his figure appearing at the door, his eyes wide with terror. But he couldn't see it, the shadow that now loomed over her, its hollow eyes fixed on her. She stumbled, her breath a frantic gasp, but the shadow followed, whispering, clawing at the air. "Alara, what have you done?" Marcus's voice was a distant echo now, the room spinning as darkness swallowed her. The mist outside was thick, wrapping the village of Verloc in a cold, silver shroud. Beneath its suffocating embrace, the narrow stone paths of the village seemed to wind like twisted veins, and the ancient forest whispered just beyond, its dark silhouette shifting restlessly. In her small, dimly lit room, Alara sat alone, her face bathed in the weak, golden glow of a single flickering candle. Before her lay the ancient forbidden book, its leather-bound cover cracked with age, and its faint, musty scent drifting like a ghostly breath in the room. Midnight was approaching, the hour of shadows, the moment when the world between life and death seemed to thin. Alara's eyes never left the clock's ticking hands, her fingers drumming nervously on the table's edge. The instant the clock's chime echoed through the silence, she felt a chill, a creeping cold that seemed to seep through the walls, whispering against her skin. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the book's cover, her stubborn curiosity overpowering the dull ache of fear gnawing at her chest. "It's just a story," she whispered to herself, her voice a fragile thread. But her heart betrayed, her pounding against her ribs, a prisoner trying to break free. The book opened with a dry, crackling sound, the yellowed pages whispering against one another like autumn leaves in a dying forest. Her eyes scanned the faded ink, and the tale began. The first words, a name, Amara. A woman once renowned for her beauty and brilliance, Amar had craved forbidden knowledge, a hunger that led her down a path of betrayal and darkness. Her arrogance pushed her to make a terrible pact, seeking to see beyond the thin veil of life and death. But such desires came at a price. Amara was cursed, her soul forever wandering the misty forest of Verloc, transformed into a shadow, a whisper in the wind, a chill in the darkness. The story warned that those who read it alone might awaken her restless spirit. A soft, mocking laugh slipped from Alara's lips. "Superstitions," she muttered, dismissing the tale as nothing more than a frightened peasant's fable. But, as her voice faded, she noticed a strange heaviness in the air, the candle's flame trembling, casting wild shadows that danced across the walls. A faint rustling sound whispered at the edge of her hearing, like dry leaves caught in a bitter wind. She forced herself to keep reading, her stubborn mind clinging to reason. Yet her breath quickened, and her fingers tightened around the book's edges, the cold deepening, sinking into her bones. The wind outside seemed to moan, a low, mournful wail that slid through the cracks in the walls, stirring her dark hair. "It's just the wind," she whispered, but her voice sounded smaller now, swallowed by the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. Then, without warning, the candle's flame shuddered violently before dying, plunging the room into darkness. Alara gasped, her pulse racing as her eyes searched desperately for the faint glow of moonlight through the window. But the world beyond was an endless black void. Her fingers fumbled in the darkness, reaching for the box of matches. But as she struck one, a sudden icy touch grazed her wrist, cold and weightless like the breath of a shadow. Panic coiled in her chest, a snake tightening around her heart, but she fought against it. "No, it's just my mind," she whispered, her voice trembling. With shaking hands, she managed to relight the candle, but its flame was weak, a dying ember barely piercing the thick darkness. And then it came, a voice, faint and distant, yet cold as the grave. "Alara." Her name drifted through the room, a whisper slithering through the cold air. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and her fingers gripped the book with white-knuckled intensity. "It's the wind," she whispered, trying to bury her fear beneath the weight of reason. "It's just the wind." But the voice came again, clearer now, brushing against her ear like a cold breath. "Alara." "Who's there?" she cried, her voice breaking. Silence. The darkness seemed to throb around her, the candle's light flickering madly. She stared at the book, and her heart skipped a beat as she saw the ink on the page shifting, fading and reforming into strange, twisted symbols. Her vision blurred, a sudden dizziness washing over her, and she shook her head violently, refusing to give in to the growing terror. "It's just a trick of the light, a trick of my mind." But as her eyes lifted, the darkness in the corners seemed to pulse, a shadow slipping across the wall, a formless shape that vanished the moment she turned. "I am here." The whisper was louder now, a voice like cold metal scraping against her bones. Alara's breath came in ragged gasps, her pulse a wild drumbeat in her ears. She tried to stand, but her legs felt numb, her mind a fog of fear. If I stop reading, she thought, her fingers turning the pages faster, desperate to reach the story's end. But the words seemed to twist, the letters merging, writhing like dark worms on the page. Her trembling lips mouthed the words, trying to make sense of them, but the voice whispered again, brushing against her ear. "You read. You called me." A nervous, desperate laugh escaped her. "You're not real. None of this is real." But even as she spoke, a shadow loomed just beyond the candle's weak glow, a formless darkness that seemed to breathe, to pulse with silent rage. Her vision blurred, the room spinning around her, and yet she read on, her voice a frantic whisper. The tale's final words burned into her mind. "Those who do not stop reading when they hear the whisper will never escape the shadow." Her heart seized, a cold knife twisting in her chest. Too late, she understood. The story was not just a tale. It was a warning. Her reflection in the dark window showed her pale, terrified face, but behind her a darker shape loomed, a shifting shadow. panic surged through her, and she tore her gaze away, slamming the book shut. Silence, thick and suffocating. The candle's light was barely a faint glow now, the darkness pressing closer,